Let's talk about Dave Chappelle talking about trans activists, and we'll see if you guys agree. This is from the Daily Wire. Dave Chappelle on meeting trans activists. They wanted to incite violence against themselves for publicity. That is a very spicy thing to say, Dave. Holy cow. Let's see how he backs up this assertion. Legendary comedian Dave Chappelle recently slammed transgender activists during an episode of his new podcast over a protest they staged at one of his events last year. Chappelle made the remarks on his The Midnight Miracle podcast with co-hosts Talib Kweli and Yasin Bey. I don't know that guy. I guess apparently they had made a pledge to the public at large that they would make their club a safe space for all people and that they would ban anything they deemed transphobic, Chappelle said. This is a wild stance for an artistic venue to take, especially one that's historically a punk rock venue. No kidding, punk is dead. Chappelle then described what happened at the Varsity Theater in Minneapolis, the venue he switched to after the previous one canceled his show. These were grown people of various genders and gender identities, Chappelle said. They threw eggs. They threw eggs at fans who were lined up to see the show. One lady was so mad with the protesters, she picked up a police barricade, he continued. You ever seen one? They look like a bike rack. This bee picked that barricade up by herself and threw it at the crowd. I gotta tell you, it was an amazing feat of strength for a woman. Chappelle said that people inside the theater were extremely happy to see him because suddenly going to see a comedy show was this huge act of defiance. I don't think anyone had any malicious intent. In fact, one of the things that these people, the trans and their surrogates, always say is that my jokes are somehow going to be the root cause of some impending violence that they feel is inevitable for my jokes. But I gotta tell you, as abrasive as they were, the way they were protesting, throwing eggs at people, throwing barricades, cussing and screaming, none of my fans beat them up. In fact, the people in the crowd would just say, "We love you," like, what are you talking about? Chappelle said that when he did talk to some of the transgender protesters, he felt like the majority were just sticking to the playbook. We're here to stir stuff up. I feel like they wanted me to say something inflammatory. In a weird way, I think some of them had the intention of inciting violence against themselves for publicity, Chappelle said. Like they were doing things that a regular person would knock one of these people out. Yes, so that is entirely consistent with my understanding of the mindset of the people who are activists in the name of ideologies like this. When you come up with the left-wing ideology that says that the power dynamic is all that matters, and you'll hear it when you listen to them, because they'll talk about how power is all the right cares about, and they just want to be in positions of power, and racism is privilege plus power, or whatever. And it's all about power, and anytime somebody harps on something like this, you really have to question whether they're just telling you what they actually think. Because projection is a very real thing. Like, it's not something to be taken lightly. And I understand where projection comes from. We all can only look at the world through our own eyes, which means that everything we see is through the filter of how we would respond if we were in the position of the person we're talking to or about. So one of the things that I always keep in mind with this is that they are projecting. First of all, they are telling you what they would do in this situation, not necessarily what you are doing, which really helps when people come at you with all kinds of insults. I also always used to tell people, if you are just getting onto the internet for the first time, you need to be on very good terms with your understanding of yourself, because people are going to call you all sorts of horrible things. And if there's any question in your mind as to whether you are one of those things, you're going to be destroyed by what they tell you. You're going to be completely shaken up by the things these people say. That's not something that I wish for anyone. And because I believe most of the people coming from the right are acting in good faith and know themselves better than those coming from the left, I think it's safe to say that it's a good rule of thumb to go onto the internet knowing firmly who you are and being ready to defy people who accuse you of being things that you're not. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about name calling with this next article, where we really get into some of the depravity that's going on in California and the power of using a name to deflect something. The power of accusing someone of being homophobic or transphobic is really something quite special even now. And it's really intriguing to me because I'm not sure exactly why this works so well on the right, except that I think that it digs right into what Jordan Peterson has to say about logos and the concept of words shaping the world. This is something that the left seems to understand very, very well, even if they don't seem to fully understand the actual implications. The left seems to understand that if you change the words people use, you actually can change what they think of the situation. And this is so interesting because it's actually kind of rooted in stoic thinking, because it's a very common trope in Stoicism. Epictetus talked about it, Marcus Aurelius talked about it, Cicero talked about it. All of these guys talk about the concept of shifting your perception to change how you engage with the world. They say you are surrounded by a whole host of factors that you have no control over, and you can either lose sleep over those things, or you can hone in on the things that you do control and make that effort. And that's part of the reason that I opened this whole episode with that story about that young man in North Carolina who chose to stop drinking. He said he immediately lost 30 pounds and he was spurred by this weight loss to go on, hit the gym really hard, listen to David Goggins, eat rocks for breakfast, swear a lot, and run like 700 miles a day. And it was really great for him. It's perfect for a young man to look at it that way, but it's so necessary. And part of the reason that I'm getting my own health under control is because you only control what you personally are responsible for. And that's actually really vindicating to realize. But it ties back into this concept that we shape our own perception of the world. And if someone comes along and calls a male a female, and you are forced, whether or not that person is there, to use those pronouns, it is going to alter your view of the world. So that's a co-opting of Stoicism, because it's taking a tiny corner of what you personally control and it's co-opting it. It's hijacking it. It's saying you are now going to do what I tell you to do, even when I'm not there, and it's going to shift your perspective in my favor, which is the sleaziest thing that I can possibly imagine. And we're really going to get into it, as I said, in this next article. It's going to be a lot of fun, but I think I'm really glad that Dave Chappelle is bringing this to the public parlance. I think it's super important for people to realize that, yes, this is what activists want. And I do think it's important to separate activists from regular, actual trans people like Blair White. I think that there are people who are trans who want nothing more than just to pass as a gender that they are not, and to be able to get on with their normal lives and leave everyone else alone. And I have nothing but respect for anybody who wants to do that. I think that's fully fair. As long as you're not involving underage children, perfectly fine. If you're not endangering anyone else, I think that's great. The problem is activists, and activists are rarely truly good faith. I'm classifying everyone in one group here, so bear with me, but activists are rarely acting in good faith and are rarely, honestly, transgendered people. Because in my experience, from what I've observed, the people who are trans activists have become so because they looked at the world and they saw that there was a market for this particular victim class. And they dove into it with everything they had. And you can kind of see this with Dylan Mulvaney, who is the young gentleman who went to the White House and talked to Joe Biden about being in his days of girlhood, and who constantly talks about stuff like period products and purses and stuff of that nature. And he is living out the most embarrassing, humiliating, offensive stereotype of femininity. He talks about how his first day of girlhood, he cried like 3 times and overreacted, and he said he was fine when he definitely wasn't. This man is a trained actor, and he was offended before he got into this shtick, before he became a woman. He was offended that he couldn't play female parts. So with the advent of COVID, he saw his opportunity and he jumped on the chance to become the person that he was told that he could not act. I find Dylan Mulvaney to be a fascinating case subject because he has done such interesting things in such a little amount of time. And he's really gone all in. He's truly a method actor. So I'm very curious. I'm going to try to keep up on him for sure. He's been doing these collaborative projects with another person, I think named Jeffrey Marsh, who considers themselves to be non-binary. So this person has a beard, but they also have bright red lipstick, very inexpertly applied, and incredibly sparkly eyeshadow. And Jeffrey is just telling people that even if parents don't accept you, poor little trans confused child, Jeffrey accepts you and he will bring you into his fold. So genuinely disturbing stuff. Really makes him look like a creep. And I think Dave Chappelle is really onto something. I hope the public will listen to him moving forward, because what he has to say, I've always thought that comedians were very much the canary in the coal mine for a lot of this stuff. And Dave Chappelle has certainly been a lightning rod. Hopefully people will pay attention.